more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Welcome, everyone, to another wonderful episode of Sense of Beer Style with Julia and Jeremy, and we couldn't be more excited to be in the English Barley Wine land today from the 2021
I've been waiting a long time for
guidelines.
This.
Yeah, it's such a great base style. It really is. This is a style, Jeremy, that started the American barley wine. It inspired many other styles. This is a style with history. Style, stems from Burton ales back to 1872 from Bass Number One. So Bass Ale, that brewery and brand. This is a style that you can and should drink fresh and also age. So they're super fun there. You've got, variants in its history as a style where Whitbread brought it along and created a gold version, which is fun. And it just led to so much appreciation of beer. So yay. And I would say, Jeremy, what are the key ingredients that would help our listeners get grounded on English barley wine?
Oh, it's funny. This is such a beautiful expression of all the ingredients of beer. This is, for me, this is just one of the pinnacles of what the flavor experience can be. But that's one of the things I love about beer is it comes from humble beginnings. I mean, this beer, can use, it's all expected. We can use a British pale ale malt. They're going to use some crystal malts, and maybe they'll add just a touch of dark malts for color, not necessarily roasty flavor, but just to get a little bit of color out of it. These are going to have higher gravities, higher alcohol, so they'll add some sugars to really help boost that alcohol production. They may even have a few other tricks up their sleeve. Brewers are wily and wonderful DIYers. But with this style, we can expect those base malts. We can expect those beautiful English hops and that beautiful expressive British yeast to really give a sense of place. I just absolutely love these. Let's talk about what they look like. You talk, I'll pour. I've got one here.
Awesome. And you notice if you listen to our show that we follow Beer Judge Certification Program style guidelines, order of what the BJCP guidelines would cover: appearance, flavor, aroma, mouthfeel, etc. We will literally ground on appearance, but then take you into aroma. So it's a little different than their order. That said, the appearance, you're going to get a broad range of like golden amber to dark brown, right? That is a range. Sometimes beautiful ruby highlights from the malted barley that's used. Never black or opaque. Light to moderate off-white color of foam, I think, is indicative and something to expect. And if it's not, it's out of style guidelines. But might have low head retention or collapsing of that collar of foam based on the alcohol by volume, and also maybe from additional hop oils and the like. Very clear, though, is a emphasis. Brilliant clarity, as a matter of fact. And then you're going to have a little bit of viscosity, maybe some legs, just like when you're drinking wine that you would swirl in the glass to see something and showcase how much ethanol is in it. It might have some visible legs to it in terms of the appearance. And so, Jeremy, what are you smelling out of the glass?
Well, if I can add just one little thing, if you notice, for those of you who are listening, I'll describe it. If you're watching, you can see my glass. I need to remember to wear white t-shirts every time. It helps people see it. But there is no foam on this beer that I just poured. And a lot of that has to do with the alcohol. It's just the foam and alcohol do not get along. And this is a great example of that. So don't expect much foam out of this. But the aroma, this is where I get this. I love malty beers and malt complexity. It's got a medium high to high, rich malt. It could be bready, could be toasty, could be molasses, could be treacle, could be caramel, could be toffee. You could have these wonderful dark dried fruits like dates and prunes and other fruits like that too. And that's just to begin. Everyone's going to have a little bit different take to it, but this is pretty common. And when you get this, again, you can have this a medium low to a high. Now, let me repeat that. It's quite a range. A medium low to a high, floral, earthy, like orange marmalade type of hops that are characteristic of England. But there's a huge range there. When we'll talk about this in a minute, with American barley wine, we expect a lot more hops and expect more of the hop character. This is going to be stony, earthy tea and marmalade is just wonderful. Um, the alcohol in this, it could be low and balanced. It could be medium and pronounced, but it should always be in balance. It should always be a part of the experience and not just taking over the experience. But these are beers. Wonderful stories come from these beer styles where a baby is born and they brew a barley wine, and the baby and that lad grows up and turns 18, and they finally crack those bottles open because these can age. I don't know about 18 years, but they can age quite a while. So to have some of these beers that have port, sherry, and other type of flavors, like a little bit of like a amber honey can come through in some of these age versions. So this is where it just gets deeper and more complex and more interesting with age for these beers. But that's aroma. Let's talk about flavor.
And that aroma really, that description so much applies to what would also carry over and fall into the flavor. You've got an emphasis on paler or darker versions. That's going to give you a bit of differences. But style guidelines somewhat can be maddening. Let's just admit the elephant in the room. Look, if you're testing, you're a beverage buyer, you want to be a Cicerone, whatever, beer judge, you should know these guidelines. But when you get guidelines that talk about the hop aroma and flavor and bitterness, quote unquote, can vary widely, that's maddening, right? So it's all about you getting a sense of is everything firing on all cylinders to lead you to indicate you to the flavor profile that you have come to know and expect for English barley wines. So I would emphasize the malt, as Jeremy was talking about in the aroma. It's really grounding on that malty complex sweetness with bread and biscuit and caramel, toffee, exactly, to really look for. And then as these beers age, you get more dried fruit, right? That's going to really showcase with the age. And when I say dried fruit, I mean it could be anything from, say, figs and prunes to dried cranberries or cherries, right? That's a little maddening too, but at least it gets you in that lane, right? And then in bitterness, it can be light to fairly strong depending on the brewer. Note that bitterness does stave off with time and diminish. And also with time, malt flavors will advance to more honey-like, sometimes going towards almond and benzaldehyde. And that is nothing that I am afraid of. That is the beautiful showcase of age towards beers, just like fine wines, that can bring very desirable oxidative qualities to the table. So finish and aftertaste is also to a spectrum, right? Aftertaste can be moderately dry to moderately sweet. Well, that doesn't help y'all. But and we'll get to the vital statistics. If we look at the vital statistics, at least if it's in the final gravity or the residual sugar range of what we'll describe when we talk about the stats, then you have at least some kind of hint of what you're going towards. So yeah, very, very interesting style to study and get to know. But the better you get at tasting, the more, if you know the ground rules for what the style guidelines give you, you're going to start, your brain and your palate will start to identify what is up. Yeah.
And when it comes to studying this style, you have to grab different versions of it. You have to taste it, and just remember, it's all about the journey, especially with the style.
So
When it
let's go
comes
with
to
mouthfeel.
when it comes to mouthfeel, this is a bigger beer. Julia, you're going to talk about stats a little bit. I love this conversation about the final gravity and what that does to our beer, but this has a full body. It's not quite syrupy, but it's not that far off. When I think about textures, I always kind of describe, you have that ripstop nylon that's on all your outdoor gear. Then you have that kind of smooth nylon webbing. Then you have the silk. Then you have velvet, and you have all these textures in between. To me, this is just very velvety. It's like if this were a fabric, I would love to just rub my hands across this all day long. It just feels wonderfully smooth and comforting, like a fleece blanket on my palate. The body, however, as this thing ages, as this beer gets older, if there's still yeast involved, it is going to lighten the body. So just be aware that it's not always full. If you have a lighter bodied version of this, it might be an aged version. So just keep that in mind. But it's just smooth. There should be alcohol warmth. The alcohol feel has a nice little uh, kind of a little pop mid palate for me in both feel and flavor. But it should be a nice feeling. It should never be harsh. Let's just put it that way. The carbonation on this is going to be low to medium. It shouldn't be highly carbonated. It should be slightly below average. We want the carbonation there to kind of give balance to that heavy body, but that's not all about carbonation. So that carbonic pop and that acidity that comes through should be muted. And so this is what you can expect from a good version of an English barley wine. But let's see. Next on our list, let's talk about the style comparison.
And one of my favorite games of beer tasting is putting one style against others, trying to
Yeah.
blind taste, knowing the category and characteristics of each of those styles and figure out which one is which. So if you were to take English barley wine, you're going to put it next to an American barley wine. Obviously, it inspired the style, as I shared earlier in the Stylecast here. But for an English barley wine, it's going to be less hoppy and bitter, so less hop emphasis, and more malty and fruitier, more yeast esters, more malt essence. Then slip in an old ale, which is a very complex style. We have a style cast on old ale, and it's a very layered style. And the English barley wine, though, is not going to be, as aggressive on flavor and ABV as most old ales. And also, too, old ale really is asking for that age and demanding that style showcase age. So just keep that in mind next to it. And then it's not as caramel and malt centric as a Scottish wee heavy, and also not as sweet. Those are great styles to put those all next to. And Jeremy, what commercial examples would people maybe use when they're doing that game?
Yeah, and so an easy way to find something is go find a barley wine, and if you can, make sure it says British or English barley wine, and that will help. And it may not be a perfect example, but at least you're heading in the right direction. Some of the iconic versions of this listed on the 2021 BJCP guidelines. We're looking at the Burton Bridge Thomas Sykes Old Ale. Now it does say Old Ale in that name, and I haven't had one, so I cannot corroborate if that's more of an old ale or more of a barley wine, but it's listed, so I'm going to list it here. The Hogsback A over T. I love these names. The Brits are great at naming stuff. Robinson's Old Tom, Fuller's Golden Pride, the Coniston number 9. I always think about that and think, the whole Beatles number 9, number 9, number 9. So that would be just a great a British barley wine. Probably listen to a Beatles album too. And then of course the classic iconic. I've had a bunch of these. The J.W. Lee's Vintage Harvest Ale. It doesn't say barley wine in the name. It doesn't need to. That is the classic. So find one of those. Lately, I found those in smaller cans, which for a strong beer is perfect. So go grab 2 of those and drink one now and drink one later. Those are commercial examples. But Julia, let's get into the vital stats. This is an interesting beer.
Yes, well done, Jeremy. And we'll talk about this maddening, span and spectrum in the stats now. I'll ground you, though, on the mnemonics and the little memory devices that I use. Again, we are talking about English barley wine from the 2021 BJCP guidelines. The word English starts with the word E. If you draw a line down, your brain might think 8, right? The E, you draw a line down on the end of the E, the 3 tips of those parts of the letter, and it's an 8. The stats here for English barley wine have lots of 8s and lots of 12s. So we'll start with original gravity, 1080 to 1120. Wow. That's an 80 and a 12 in there. 1080 to 1120 original gravity. Final gravity, more 8s, 1018 to 1030. So big broad spectrum. 1018 is a very higher beginning final gravity. So just remember these beers are sweeter, and getting to the 1030 range. Wow, that's a really, really big beer. ABV, more 8 and 12s. You've got alcohol by volume, 8% to 12%. right? So that's going to help you with the BJCP listed guideline stats. International bitterness units doesn't have either an 8 or a 12. So sorry, but 35 bitterness units to 70, that's a really broad range. 35 starting to
Big
get to
one.
be discernible. 70, wow, much more bitter. But then SRM, back to my 8s and kind of 12s or 2s. SRM, standard reference method, is 8. So getting just to amber, light copper, all the way to 22 would take us towards brown. So hopefully that's helpful. European Brewing Convention, Jeremy, I did not prepare. You usually are Mr. Conversion guidelines, and certainly you can look them up if you want to convert. But Jeremy, do you want to add anything to those vital
Yeah,
stats?
the EBCs are pretty simple. Simple math. If we take an SRM of 8 to 22 and we just effectively double it, we end up with 16 to 44, and that will put us, not in the ballpark, but right in the middle of the ballpark, and we're effectively where we need to be. And Julia, you mentioned all the gravities. If you're a Plato person working with Plato, the original Plato, we're looking at 20 to 30. If you're for the final Plato, we're looking at 4.5 to 7.5. Again, for Plato, that's quite big. And if kind of converting, if you're not an ABV person, you're a Plato person, then we're looking at a beer of a strength of 15.5 to 22.5. Again, there's a bit of a range, but it's all quite big. But let's talk about glassware and temperatures real quick. This is a beer. I put this beer, for those of you who are listening, I put it in a snifter. For those who are watching, you can see my snifter. The snifter is a great glass for this because it's not designed to fill to the rim. These are strong beers. Let's take it low and slow. Let's just enjoy this experience. And snifters are perfect for this because this is the jet engine of the aroma world. This is where I can take this beer and swirl it without getting my white T-shirt stained with this beautiful brown beer, and then have to go to Smith and find another one. I can swirl this thing, and the way that it shapes toward the top is that jet engine to fill my nose with these incredible, wonderful malt-driven volatiles. This, for me, is the best glass to drink this out of. I have had these out of a red plastic party cup. I'm not proud of it, but the worst glass is no glass. The best glass is the right glass. That's my take on it. Temperature wise, I want these warmer. I'm not going to lie. I pulled these out of the fridge and I'm going to let them sit for a while. I want something stemmed so I can hold the bulb of the glass in my hand and warm it up. I want these 50 degrees or 10 degrees Celsius at a minimum. These open up when they get warmer. They become more beautiful as they warm up. So really let them open up is my advice. But let's talk about pairings, unless you want to add something.
I would say home stretch. I'm ready to talk about pairings. And it's the whole reason we drink is not just to drink, but to drink and eat. And so pairings are a wonderful thing to talk about. English barley wine is going to bring nuance to the table from some of those herbal, more floral English or UK hops that do elicit certain types of blue cheeses, the blue vein, and the actual essence of more dense blue cheeses are going to be a home run with, I'm going to say, more English barley wine over American barley wine. American barley wine would be like adding with the hop notes of citrus and the forest, maybe orange marmalade, right? Drizzled over that blue cheese would be more of an American barley wine. But the English barley wine is going to have a lot of synergies. I would definitely love the fact that the cheese is dense and rich. My mouth's already watering talking about it. A lot of fat, right? Oleogustus or fat is in a blue cheese with those marbled veins of incredible flavor and advancement from the universe, we shall say. So, I mean, I'm like kind of actually just distracted and focused on that as like my main suggested pairing because it's just such a simple one to calibrate on, where beer and food often, if you get a great pairing, are 1 + 1 = 5. That's a home run to me. And I do think the beer, in this case, the English barley wine, even makes the blue cheese more palatable. You can handle more of it on your palate. Some of that light carbonation washes, rinses the tongue and gets you ready for that next bite. meanwhile, you find synergies with the actual bitterness to that beer, going towards the fat and telling that fat to kind of calm down and wash away. And then you get a more of the essence of the actual flavor in that cheese. So I guess my time is up. I guess I'll just stick with that. What would you add,
Well,
Jeremy, to the pairing
well,
mix?
your discourse about those kind of blue cheeses, I just go right to just that wonderful creamy paste of a Stilton with this is just mind blowing, palate enrapturing. It's just incredible. I think with the big malt flavor of this, I could see a pot roast, especially with horseradish, if I wanted to take a sharp left turn and have some fun with it. I always bring up Osso Bucco with these big malty beers. That's just wonderful. But for dessert, this is fantastic with a bread pudding. One of my favorite desserts I've bought and made the last 2 years for my birthday is an olive oil cake. And these barley wines are fantastic with that, the texture, the grassiness flavor, the olive oil, and the sweetness, and in the citrus kind of hint that you can add to it. But on any daily basis, you give me some mixed nuts like pistachios and marconas, or some dried fruits like apricots and dates and dried cherries. Though just that simple kind of like meal is fantastic with a beer like this, where you can sit, you can taste, you can think, or not. It's up to you, but it's just wonderful. That's what I want with this beer.
Yay for you all listening. Yay for us. I want to buy cases and cases and brew, barrels and barrels of this now. And hopefully you really do have English barley wine as a part of your regular beer diet, because it's an incredible style.
Yes. But it
Yeah.
pairs especially well with friends, because I really ought not to drink this all myself.
That is right. Well, with that, Jeremy, thank you for the show. And everyone, thanks for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, and hope you have a good beer tasting from here.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With Advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.